All right, good morning, and welcome to this morning's webinar. This is the fourth in our series going through our guide, Taking the First Steps Together, a guide for creating collaborative peer-led services for parents affected by substance use. Today we're going to focus on chapter 1.4, which is supervision. We'd love to get started with some introductions. If people want to introduce themselves in the chat, we'd love for you to share your name and your role, where you're joining from, and we can get the chat going this morning. My name is Adrienne Girard, and I'm the director of the Training and Technical Assistance team for First Steps Together. And this webinar series is for anyone who's looking to launch or further develop, enhance their peer-led home visiting or clinical services for families impacted by parental substance use. And each month, we're highlighting a different chapter of the guide, exploring the concepts, offering examples from practice, and the tools to support both the staff working in the field and the families they serve. And we're going to share a link right now to download a copy of the guide, so you can follow along if you want. So I wanted to talk a little bit about First Steps Together, do some very quick housekeeping, and then I'm going to hand it over to our presenters this morning, who are Erica Napolitan and Amy Summer. So for those who aren't familiar with First Steps Together, it's a home visiting program dedicated to serving and empowering families on their parenting and recovery journey. We have sites across Massachusetts that serve parents and expectant parents who have been affected by substance use. We offer voluntary and free services in the home, community, or virtually, delivered by a peer support specialist who's a parent in recovery or mental health counselor with specialized training. And we offer groups and care coordination. First Steps Together is open to any person 18 years of age or older who's used opioids, stimulants, alcohol, cannabis, or other substances in the past or present, and who is pregnant or expecting a child or has at least one child age 5 or younger. On our website, www.firststepstogetherma.org, you can find more information, including contact information about our sites. So just a couple of reminders. This meeting's being recorded and available publicly, and we'll send out a link to the recording and all of the resources after the webinar. We do ask you to mute when you're not speaking, and please feel free to unmute for questions and discussion, and we'd love for folks to share in the chat throughout. We just wanted to note that this information that we share is what we found and what we know so far, and we always welcome others' experiences in the field. And we recognize that language and best practices are ever evolving. And as presenters, we aim to create a brave space for diversity, equity, inclusion, and we hope that others are willing to engage in this way. So we have two amazing presenters. I'm really excited to introduce them. Erica Napolitan is the Assistant Director of the Training and Technical Assistance team for First Steps Together at Jewish Family Children's Services of Greater Boston. She began her work 13 years ago as a family support specialist and MOUD advocate with the Fresh Start program after successfully completing the program herself as a client. And through her work at Fresh Start and later Project Nest, she began speaking publicly, training providers and medical professionals from across the country on substance-exposed newborns, the benefits of peer support, coaching, and using parenting as a catalyst for recovery, and the importance of trauma-informed practices for individuals and families with substance use disorder. We also have Amy Summer, who has been providing services to parents and young children for almost 20 years. She's trained in interventions to treat trauma in young children, including child-parent psychotherapy, trauma-informed cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as a trainer for Mothering for the Inside Out, which is an evidence-based intervention to support parents impacted by substance misuse. Bringing today her good fortune to have worked on 4 nationally funded evaluation projects treating parents and children, and hoping that she can share her wide base of experience with this group. So today we're going to cover an overview of chapter 1.4, which is supervision. We're going to go through the types of supervision, but then really hone in on reflective supervision. We're going to have a breakout and we'll leave time at the end for questions and answers. So just to give some context to our training before we dig into chapter 4, I just wanted to share a little bit about how and why we created this guide. When we set off to create this resource a few years ago, we envisioned that it would be an implementation manual for the First Steps Together sites, which started as a pilot program. And this would support and guide the sites in running this program. But now the guide has grown into a 300 plus labor of love, and the final product is more of a resource for anyone interested in this work. This guide is a compilation of theory and practice, process, experiences of so many who are doing this rewarding and at times exhausting work every day. And we received a lot of input from folks at every site and content experts across the field. And we paid special attention to the voices of those with lived experience and those who represent often marginalized populations within the recovery community. You can see in the table of contents that it's divided into 3 sections. There's building the foundation, serving families, and then the My Family Portfolio and Provider Guide. The My Family Portfolio is a workbook that was created by parents in recovery for parents in recovery, and it's a collection of tools and resources for families impacted by parental substance use to support both their parenting and their recovery journeys. And we'll put a link again if you want to download it. So now I'll hand it over to Erica to talk a little bit more about supervision in chapter 1.4.
Thank you, Adrienne. So this brings us to our focus for today. And for those of you that are following along, you can see here that this is the cover section of Building the Foundation, which is found on page 15, and also the cover page for chapter 1.4 Supervision, which begins on page 108. So today we will review portions of chapter 1.4, which is supervision. We're going to do a brief overview, and this section includes types of supervision, supervision in support of peer staff, supervision in support of supervisors, supervision in support of clinicians, and staff support and wellness. We're going to just touch on a little bit of this today, so I encourage you to please check out the other pieces of this chapter after this training. Each one of our chapters starts with a quote, and this chapter begins with this quote, which states, "This work is too important to do alone. How you are is as important as what you do. It is not possible to work on behalf of human beings to try to help them without having powerful feelings aroused in oneself." And this is Dr. Jerry Paul, a pioneer in the field of early childhood education. So we wanted to start before we get going and really ask you to put in the chat, why do you feel that supervision is important? And is supervision important to you? I'll give you a minute to pop it in there. 2 minds are better than 1. Yes, thank you, Stacia. Processing feelings and people that I'm seeing and experiences that touch on me. Always good to get another perspective. Yes, these are good. I think supervision is important to have. I like to be able to share what I'm walking through, whether it be with helping other people or myself. Good outlet to vent. Very important. Best practices reviewed. Hard work, and we all need support. Absolutely, Amy. Yes. Yes. These are good. These are all very good reasons. Yes, Chelsea, can bring up strong emotions, our own experiences and parenting. Quality supervision can be crucial. Absolutely. I agree with you. We are outlets that need outlets. I like that, Philip. That's a good one. Always coming through with the good ones. Thanks, Philip. All right. So so all of these reasons, that is why supervision is important. And we're going to dive a little deeper today. So supervision. Supervision really offers an opportunity to promote the idea that wellness and self-care are the core of the work that we do. Really by implementing these practices for staff, we set the example and model the importance in taking care of ourselves for the families that we work with. All staff, regardless of their role, benefit from supervision and a supportive environment. Supervision really may be the most important policy or practice to support staff wellness. Regularly receiving supervision improves the services that we provide to families. It results in better care and outcomes for families. All staff benefit from regular encouragement, guidance, feedback from team members and supervisors. And even part-time staff in our program spend multiple hours per week in supervision. Both scheduled and on-demand supervision provide a time for supervisees to really problem solve specific situations, examine biases, consider alternate possibilities for challenges, and discuss resources and concrete needs. Supervision also allows time for staff to practice role playing and collaborative conversations with other service providers, really to review like program processes and paperwork, to think with their supervisor about their professional development goals, and to integrate skills learned in continuing education and trainings. Um, so staff support and wellness. I think this is really an important piece when we're thinking about like the overall purpose of supervision is providing that support. And this is a quote from one of our project directors that really sticks with me as I think about doing this work and I think about supporting staff. So it says, "We are the keepers of these family stories. That is a huge responsibility. While we often get to celebrate parents' growth and accomplishments, we're also often hearing and holding stories and experiences that can be incredibly sad and frustrating." And I think that that's really the reality of doing this work, of walking alongside families. We see them reach goals and milestones and successes, but we also hold the hard, and we have to have a space to take that. So really staff hold space for stories and trauma of others, which can put them at higher risk for compassion fatigue, secondary trauma, and burnout. This responsibility can be challenging and even triggering at times and bringing up big feelings. Staff will really be asked to support participants through removals, reoccurrence of use and relapses, active use, and even overdose. Staff experience burnout from supporting families through the constant fight of overcoming adversity and advocating within systems that are not designed to be intuitive or supportive to the families that we serve. It's really important as we're thinking about this to think about agencies to build policies to support and encourage staff to tend to their own recovery and wellness during work time. And supervision time can be used to continue ongoing conversations about how we're balancing those responsibilities and prioritizing recovery, maintenance, and wellness. And Chelsea highlighted this in her comment about why supervision is important. But for those of us that are using lived experience with this work, we could be sitting with families that are walking through something that we may have walked through ourselves. This can bring up big feelings about our own experiences. It can often be hard to kind of hold that space for someone else when you're hurting and feeling things inside. Being able to take that to our supervisor or to other staff that we're working with, our coworkers, and talk it through is one of the most important things that we can do. It helps us process through. It helps us release some of those feelings and those thoughts. It helps us speak our truths about what we're walking through. And it helps prevent that burnout and that compassion fatigue and that secondary trauma. And if we're not getting these things out, we're holding them in. And over time, that's going to hurt us and our ability to do the work. So this is why at First Steps Together, we put such um, so much emphasis on supervision and how we're supporting everyone that does this work on this project. And staff support and wellness isn't the only reason why we do this. Supervision is also really important because programs can really provide support to professionals in ways that mirror the supports that professionals provide to parents. So this process is referred to as the parallel process, and it occurs when similar practices are reflected in different parts of an organization, community, or system, as well as in the services provided to families. So as you can see in this chart, everything is impacted from the agency to program director to supervisor, supervisor to direct service provider, and direct service provider to parent. And the hope is that when we model these safe spaces in these reflective relationships and supervisory settings, is that, when we bring that to our families that we're working with, they'll then bring that to their children, right? Creating safe spaces, holding big feelings, being able to sit with the hard and celebrate the good is what we really hope parents will be able to do for their children. So modeling that from the top of the agency all the way through to this direct service is really important to the things that we're doing. So that brings us to different types of supervision. And there's a number of them that we're going to touch on today. And I think we're going to throw up a poll. And so there's all administrative supervision, clinical supervision, group supervision, on-demand supervision, and reflective supervision. And really all staff, regardless of role, benefit from supervision in a supportive environment. So we're going to put this poll up and we'll see. If you could please select the different types of supervision that you currently receive. Oh, look at all these numbers. Give it a couple more seconds. So far, I'm really happy to see that nobody has checked off I do not currently receive supervision, so that's good. So at least all of you are getting some type of supervision. All right. So it looks like there's a good mix. And we've got about 48% getting administrative, 35 with clinical, 39 on group, 26% on demand, and 52% receiving reflective supervision. So it's awesome. Great, guys. Thanks for doing this. All right. So, as I said, all staff, regardless of role, really benefit from supervision in a supportive environment. But supervision really is not a one size fits all. Multiple types of supervision come together to provide the comprehensive support needed to do this work. So we're going to start with administrative supervision, which is really a time designated to complete case reviews, ensure proper documentation, making sure that we're keeping up with program practices and policies. But this is really also a good space to meet people where they're at. We talked about in the last webinar, like being accommodating to different learning styles. This is a space where we would see that come through in supervision, thinking about time management, helping people with scheduling, figuring out how to use their Outlook, making sure that they have the time that they need to both see families and do documentation or other tasks that they have, note taking, data entry, time to answer questions, discussing time off, as well as like any other needs that pertain to agency or organizational policies or practices that you need to talk to. So this is kind of like the nuts and bolts type of supervision where there may be a little more direction and how-tos, and we're figuring things out. So we have clinical supervision, which really offers an opportunity for clinicians to think collaboratively about clinical or therapeutic approaches that really may best serve the family's needs. Clinical supervision is often typically delivered by a clinician for a clinician, and when it comes to licensing, this is usually required. In a lot of places, once a clinician has received their licensure, they don't always continue to get clinical supervision. But at First Steps Together, this is something that we feel is important to continue. And even for our sites that do not have the ability to provide clinical supervision to their clinicians, we make arrangements with them to receive it elsewhere, because we want to make sure that everybody is receiving the support that they need. in this, this supervision style, it can also happen between clinicians and peer staff, depending on the structure of the agency, but it has benefit for all staff and the families we serve that, clinicians can bring their lens to help support the peer staff, and peer staff can bring their lens to help support the clinician. So it goes both ways. Group supervision. This really offers an opportunity to raise like thematic challenges, practice case presentation. It encourages collaboration and critical thinking and team building. This was one of my, when I was doing direct service, one of my favorite types of supervision. This can be done as a whole team where you get together. There can be case presentations that are done and people can collaborate around this. We can also see this happen per role. At some of our sites, they have peer group supervision. So the peers will get together, or the clinicians will meet by themselves and have their own group. And it's just an opportunity to kind of, work together, to brainstorm together, to problem solve together, to share resources, to hold space, to hold the hard. It's a lot easier when we're not doing these things alone. So group supervision gives us an opportunity to really explore the work together and work together as a team to get the support that we need. On-demand supervision. So this provides a real-time support for staff when they may have questions or concerns, or they're navigating concerns that may come up, or safety issues. I think this is one of those ones where it's being able to have access to your supervisor is really critical. So maybe you just took a phone call from child welfare department and you've got some questions. It's great to be able to run to your supervisor and talk it through, even though you don't have a scheduled supervision time at that moment. Being able to brainstorm or think through problems that arise during the day, celebrate successes. I heard this great news from this participant. They're going to have reunification, and it's something you can celebrate with your supervisor. Thinking about safety concerns or other things, it's great to be able to bounce those things off of your supervisor when you need to. And this happens a lot within our project. Our supervisors are accessible, so that if staff, whether that be clinicians or peer staff or anybody, needs that extra help, the supervisor is available. This is a lot of what happens on the day-to-day and contributes to why overall our staff spend many hours in supervision in total. And this brings us to reflective supervision. And in the guide, this is what we have here, that it can be a model for the desired working relationships with parents, children, and colleagues that creates a ripple effect of collaboration and mutual respect throughout an agency. And here I'm going to turn it over to Amy Summer, and she's going to take us a little deeper into the reflective supervision and how we can use it to support both staff and families.
Thank
Take it
you
away,
so
Amy.
much, Erica, and welcome everyone. It's great to be here. So as Erica said, we're going to spend the next sort of big chunk of our time together really delving deep into reflective supervision. And there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, first, as is sort of reflected here in this quote from the guide, this one really gets at what I think we will all want in parallel process. When we are being reflective as supervisors, when we are seeing and benefiting and feeling the reflection of a supervisor, that's what we're then able to bring to families. And those of you who have heard me talk before know that I'm a big believer that helping families build their reflective abilities, their abilities to think about what's going on, think about where big feelings and behaviors come from and how they connect together. That's what the research in our field says leads to lasting, impactful change. So if we want families to be able to reflect, we have to receive that reflection ourselves. Philip, I am totally in love with that. We're outlets that need outlets. We are reflectors who need reflections. So I really hope that this sort of lands. And I'll say that we're going to talk about reflective supervision, excuse me, as Erica said, as its own structure, but also many of the other types of supervision can also be reflective. So if you're receiving supervision around a clinical case and you're really delving into the intervention that you're using, it can still be reflective. If you're in a group setting, I hope that it is a reflective setting. So this sort of has this kind of double whammy of both. I want folks to be thinking about what reflective supervision can look and feel like, as well as thinking about bringing it into the other kinds of supervision that you receive. At any point, if you're a reader, if you're someone that's like, I just want to get my hands on the how-to, there are some great authors, books, and resources really delving in chapter by chapter to reflective supervision. Throw a note in the chat with your email address, reach out to the TA team. I'll be happy to share things. And I just sort of want to give a lot of credit to the authors that I'm going to be leaning on as we go along. I particularly credit Mary Claire Heffron. If you're a reader, it's Heffron. She's really written and thought a lot about, in this field where we're thinking about parents and children together, what it takes to have a reflective space to think about parents and children together. So as I move through, I may cite some other authors, and certainly, again, happy to share those resources. So let's take a look at our next slide here, which kind of gives us some of the key ingredients or things that we want to keep in mind as we are thinking about reflective supervision. Reflective supervision, the first keyword that I hope folks take home from this is it's a collaborative space. I would say it's a space where you are going on a journey. I'm going to interchange the you, the I, who's the supervisor, the supervisee. If I'm a supervisee and I'm coming to get reflective supervision, the hope is that I am on a journey with my supervisor, that we are actually uncovering and discovering things together. And that's exactly where I hope and feel that the parallel process is really strong with families. Most of the time, we're not telling families what to do. We are not solving their problems for them. We're not pointing out whether they should turn right or left at the next major decision that they have to make. We are on a journey alongside them. We may have some additional tools, some additional maps, ideas, creativity that we can bring to the table because we're not down there in it. But we are really on a collaborative journey. And as a supervisor, I kept an eye on the participants. I know we have lots of supervisees on this call and some supervisors on this call. I can relate as a supervisor to knowing that sometimes I can see where that map's going, right? It's a lot like with a client when you're like, oh, I see the writing on the wall. This path is not going to end well. And I'm not ever going to let a provider harm a client. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to let our clients play things out to where they end up maybe making choices or being in situations that we wish they weren't. I'm not going to let a provider get that far. That would be unethical, but I am going to let them play it out loud a little bit. Well, what would happen if we kind of went that way? And then what would you be worried about? And what would you think would happen next? So it's really this collaboration together where, at least in the supervision room, we can kind of play out those next steps and hopefully have the provider realize, ooh, that might not go so well. That might have some unintended consequences. Okay, well, now this is a safe space where we can throw it in reverse and go down a different path and see what we might find if we tried something different. We are very interested as reflective supervisors in hearing about and understanding the behaviors, what the people in front of us did, their thoughts, what was going through your mind when you decided to do that, and their feelings. What was it like for you when that happened at that home visit? And I really encourage us. I know it can be, and myself as a supervisee, right? I've come in and I'm like, these are the 97 things that happened to me this week. And it is quite a show. Any of us doing home visiting, we know there's a lot of behaviors and then I this, and then they that, and then and there's objects flying, and it's crazy, right? It is our job as supervisors to try really hard to find the places where we can ask, and what was your thought in that moment? What was your intention when you asked that? What was your hope when that happened? Like, really get underneath it. That's the reflective part. And how did that feel? And I really hope that if I've created a safe supervision space, I can have supervisees tell me they felt something was terrible. They felt ashamed. They felt guilty. They realized right afterwards that they had made a huge mistake. Like, I want to hear the cruddy feelings. I really do. I think that tells me that we're really being honest about what happens when we're doing really, really hard work with infants or young children and parents together. It is hard. We mess up, and we have to be able to talk about those feelings. While we're doing reflective supervision, if you look on the right here, wow, supervisors, we got a big job. We need to be keeping all this stuff in mind. The self in this little right-hand bubble here is the self, the person who's in front of us, the supervisee. We need to keep in mind the child and a parent, a whole family constellation. the systems within which they are situated, which are often not reflective, and the culture in which the family is situated, and in which the supervisee is situated, and in which I am situated. And we're going to talk a little bit on the next slide about the importance in particular of cultures fitting into a reflective supervision model. So let's take a quick peek at that. So if I'm a supervisor, building spaces where people can feel safe, where they can feel that they can talk about things that feel terrible, where they can talk about things that happened within a family, within a home visit that didn't feel good or didn't feel right. I need to be attending to the culture and the values and the systems of oppression that are present all around all of us. If I'm not doing that, I'm probably not getting to all of the thoughts and feelings that are underneath what people do. So it's really an equity to a tool for sort of equity and incorporating diverse perspectives and including diverse perspectives in our work when we're doing reflective supervision. And in fact, the research is really clear that it is essential if we want to build a diverse workforce and if we want to engage diverse families. So as Erica mentioned, good supervision increases retention, reduces burnouts. And one of the ways that that happens in reflective supervision, particularly with people who are not of the majority culture, is that we are able to say in supervision, you living in the skin that you're in, you living in the place that you live in our world today, you walking around with the experiences that you have had impacts your work. Maybe in a great way, maybe in a not so great way. It impacts who you are. It impacts how you show up this morning. It impacts the level of stress that you've experienced, right? If you're a person who is walking around in skin, that means that when you get pulled over, your experience might be very different than when I get pulled over. And you got pulled over on the way to work this morning. That is important. It is important for me to demonstrate curiosity. What was going through your mind when that happened, right? Some people's experience might be, well, I got pulled over and I was really irritated because it made me even later for work. Some people's experience might be, I got pulled over and I was scared that I might not go home afterwards. And that is really important to be able to ask those questions to get underneath. Curiosity about experience is inherently building space for diverse perspectives, for perspectives that are quieter, less voiced, less popular, are not the majority. So I just really want to emphasize that at First Steps Together, and I hope in all of our work, attending to issues of oppression and exclusion is so important. And reflective supervision, when used in the way that it's supposed to be, is a tool for building collaboration, exploration with our colleagues. I will say personally, as a person who identifies as white, particularly in a white majority culture, having supervised people who do not identify as white, it is so important that I ask about that experience, that I make our supervision a safe space to talk about that experience. So in some of the other webinars that we've done, we've talked about the importance of that in client relationships. It is true in work relationships as well. If I am not of the cultural background, if there are differences between myself and the person that I'm supervising, it is really important that I genuinely feel a curiosity and exploration to understand, what is that like for you? What goes on for you when that happens? When we have colleagues who are supervising who are working with families of different cultural backgrounds, that can bring up big feelings. So it's all sort of in there, baked into this reflective stance of understanding what's happening for people. And this first line here is from the Diversity Informed Tenets for Infant Mental Health Practice. We will improve our practice when we reflect on the ways that culture, difference, and oppression show up in our work. So we can talk about being open, we can talk about being, caring about diversity or whatever words we want to have. If we want to improve our practice, we have to make space for reflecting on that reality, and reflective supervision is one great place to do that. All right, let's talk about some other sort of important pieces of reflective supervision that we know makes this an important part of the work. We've mentioned sort of it's really good for staff. It's also really good for clients. You can see the citation at the bottom there. This is a slide and a sort of set of research that I use when I'm advocating with people. As Erica mentioned, our staff spend a lot of time in supervision. They do. And if you're working in an agency with a productivity requirement and you're being told, well, I have to see 35 clients a week, and then I have to subtract, time to, I don't know, have basic bodily function and whatever. And wait, I don't have time for supervision. And those people who know me have heard me tell this story. I was working at an agency before the one I'm at now, not even in this state. And we were being trained in an evidence-based practice. And one of the pieces of every good evidence-based practice that I've ever seen talks about supervision. If you're doing an evidence-based practice and you're not getting supervision in that practice, you may not be doing the evidence-based practice. And our executive director at the time was like, oh, it's so great that you guys learned this evidence-based practice. And now we're going to go out and get all these grants and we're going to be this shiny place with these fancy words. He didn't quite say it like that. But I let you guys get all this training in this really great evidence-based practice. So sorry, no more time for supervision. You guys will have to figure that out. I don't know, maybe before work or something. And I have to say that I'm really proud to be a part of a team of clinicians that stood up and said, if you aren't going to make reflective supervision part of our work experience, you may not put this evidence-based practice on our fancy shiny brochures, because we are not doing the thing that you are going to say we're doing if we don't have reflective supervision in that thing. I know that there are folks on this call who might be feeling disempowered and like, well, I can't go back to my supervisor and say that. But I wonder if there are ways that we can collaborate together and really think about this makes the work better. So what is it going to take for this to happen for me? What is the key that's going to maybe shift things in my workplace? If you're not currently getting reflective supervision, and it looked like we were only at about 50%, which is not terrible, but I'd love to see it improve. So what does it look like? What do we need? And again, I know there are a lot of not supervisors on this call. And so what I hope you will take from this is some ideas about what you might need, what you might suggest to your supervisor that you try together. I recognize that's a tricky power dynamic, but I really want to honor the folks in this room who are not providing the reflective supervision, but rather receiving it. So what might I want a little more of when I become a supervisor one day? What do I want to offer? So we're going to move into sort of how we build a foundation for reflective supervision. And then I have kind of 5 ways of looking at things, thinking about things, and bringing things to light in reflective supervision that I really hope become useful tools for you. Again, whether you're a supervisor or whether you are someone who maybe wants to advocate for something, maybe check in with a peer and say, hey, how could we maybe help this be a part of our group supervision, even if I don't feel like I can change my supervisor's practice. If it is something that you recognize, if you are like, oh yeah, my supervisor does that, I love when we talk about that, then hey, that's great. You are receiving reflective supervision. And who knows, that number from that poll at the beginning might change, might go up, might go down. I don't know, I'm just riffing this, but to my TA colleagues, maybe we do the poll again at the end. We see where people think, oh, am I getting reflective supervision? I thought I wasn't, but I am, or I thought I was, but I'm not. So again, we're going to go through 5 sort of ways of being in a minute. But before we do that, I just want to offer some sort of foundational concepts to make sure that we really are talking about reflective supervision. Reflective supervision is consistent in how it goes. Remember that quote that Erica read, how we are is more important than what we do. In reflective supervision, we want to show up same time, same place, same way, same stance, consistently. We know from our trauma-informed practice work that that's what builds a sense of safety for anyone. Could be someone who's experienced trauma, could be someone who's just had the very difficult experience of some really tough home visits. But showing up with that consistency, that every week, what is this like for you? I am here to receive whatever it is that you need. So that's where I go into it's consistent in roles. One quick example to sort of highlight that. I know that time is tight. And so for some of us, we may be sitting here thinking, well, I want to do reflective supervision and I have to do administrative supervision. And one thing you can do is explicitly talk. If I'm just going to use Erica, since she was talking earlier, if Erica was my supervisee and might say something like, Erica, I so value making this a reflective space for the 2 of us. I want you to be able to lead with your needs. And I want to make sure that we have time to go over any little to-do list items or tasks that are related to the work. knowing yourself, do you imagine that that would feel good to start with that or leave space for that at the end? Right. And as the reflective supervisor, it's my job to hold that. It's my job to honor what Erica wants or wishes, and it's my job to make that time in that space. So we can do administrative tasks. We can do, I need you to finish that note by the end of business today. We can do that still in a reflective space, as long as we're being consistent in our role. We're not jumping back and forth between. It would not be appropriate to be in the middle of a reflective exploration and go, oh, yeah, actually, by the way, about that case, how come you haven't done your service logs for the last 2 weeks? That's not a reflective space. That's an administrative space, goes over here. So I know that's a bit of a concrete example, but if you notice that happening for yourself, just a reminder that sort of that lives somewhere else. It's not that supervisors can't do that. Sometimes we need to. Sometimes we have to have performance plans about, I need to check on your service logs every day because they're not getting done. But we can bring that into supervision in the appropriate time and place where we're holding our roles consistently. We talked about being collaborative. We've talked about sort of an exploration, a co-creation. What are we noticing? A lot of times what I end up doing is taking notes as a supervisor. And then as the weeks go by, I may reflect back. Yeah, that matches what I wrote a couple weeks ago. Or, oh, it's so funny because today I'm hearing just these really positive and strong words. And last week I wrote the word despair and lost. So I may be, again, sort of holding a map in a different way because I'm not in it, but I'm asking, what are we noticing on this journey that we are on together? What's happening as we unfold this? Does that sound right to you? I had a session last week where I said, wow, that's so interesting that you're using the word, and I can't remember what it actually was, but let's say that's so interesting that you're using the word empowered when you're talking about mom, because the word that I had written down the week before was stuck. Now, was I not hearing you right last week? Was there something I missed, or do you think something changed? And what do we make of that? It is completely possible as a supervisor, and it's really important. As a supervisor, I don't actually know what happened in any one home visit, in any one interaction. All I'm getting is the supervisee's view of that. And so that's all, that's what's mine to work with. That's what's mine to understand. What happened there? What was going through your mind there? How can we look at this together? Because I actually won't ever know really, truly what the client did. I mean, unless it was a video recorded session, right? So all I've got to work with is this collaborative space where my supervisee in front of me sort of paints a picture and I take a look at it and go, oh, you painted the sky green. Now, was that because you ran out of paint? Was that because that's how you saw it that day? Like that's all I got. So that exploration together is so important. And last but not least, is founded in a relationship that itself benefits from reflection, attention, conversation. How are we doing? And I don't think that necessarily has to be every week, but I really believe that checking in with folks, let's say, for example, Erica talked earlier about on-demand supervision. If I've had a time with a supervisee where they wished for something on demand and I wasn't available, because that happens, because if I'm in a room with another supervisee, I'm not going to be interrupted. I'm curious what came up for you when I wasn't available last week. And that's not just who did you reach out to and what did you do, but I imagine maybe you felt like I wasn't there for you. Did it feel overwhelming? Were you actually relieved because you didn't really want to have to explain the whole thing to me anyway? That's what we mean by attending to the relationship. What does it feel like for us to be in this relationship together? What does it mean that I'm the supervisor and you're the supervisee, especially if I have supervised people who've been in the field longer than me, who are older and more mature and wiser than me, who I have an outside of work relationship that I'd like to continue. Like, all of these things are true. And so how do we talk about that and what's happening between us as we engage in the supervisory relationship? Again, that's not an every week thing, but it is that word there, founded. It's foundational to the building of the supervisory work. All right, so let's get into sort of our 5 ways of exploring together. These aren't meant to be in any order. They're really, and I just encourage you, I intentionally have visuals on these slides, like open yourself to sort of what comes up. If there are keywords that you want to grab, think about how it would be to share cases in this way. If you've had a really difficult week with a case this week, maybe hold a case in mind as we talk about this together. Okay, so we're going to move into the next 5 slides, but really want you to be, yep, there we go. I really want you to be able to sort of sink into this a little bit. And again, as I say that out loud, maybe thinking about for yourself as a supervisor or as a provider, thinking about how things have gone this week and what would it be like to be in a space where this was the exploration that you could do. And I truly hope each and every one of you have these spaces. So the first thing we talk about, and I'm going to sort of switch back and forth in my language and the pronouns on the slides between supervisor and supervisee. A lot of the things are true for both, but maybe the language is just a little different. But for a supervisee, I invite you, and a supervisor might invite you, to notice what's happening for myself as I decide to share this case. You know, maybe we're going down a list of my cases and Jane is up next. What happens in my body? What do I feel? What do I need to do to care for myself so that I can share this in a really authentic way? Do I need to move the tissues a little closer? Do I need to say, I'm kind of nervous about talking about this one because I think I messed up? What is it that I need as a supervisee to feel like I can walk down that path in the woods in a truly collaborative space? And as a supervisor, as you get to know your supervisees, we know which ones are the hard cases. We know which ones are maybe tripping people up and leaving them feeling a little lost in the woods. What can I offer? Hey, I want to check in with you about Janie. And I know that's one that's felt like really crazy this week. Does that feel like a good place to go next? What can we offer in grounding, in breathing? Maybe it's just our own selves completely non-verbally, but just modeling a flat feet on the floor, deep breath. What is it that I can offer in a grounding way so that both of us feel that we, the supervisor and the supervisee, are able to sort of move into this journey together? So that's that first slide. And that one probably does come first, though I will also say can come throughout, right? And might be something, again, as an exploration, as a conversation, when we think about the routines of supervision, is that something you want to close with? Hey, I wonder as we wrap up and you got to go back, and for most of my staff, it's you got to go get in your car, right? Is there anything that you need to do to sort of wrap up and leave this here and be able to go hop in your car and not rear end someone? So just sort of naming that grounding, it is essential at the beginning, but it can come throughout. And again, as the supervisor, it's our responsibility to keep an eye on that, to make space for that, to offer that, to ask about that, to not to enforce it, right? That wouldn't be collaborative, but just to know that that is a key ingredient of what we are offering. All right, let's look at our next sort of way of being in supervision here. So one of the key things about supervision, and it might sound really obvious, but we're talking about human beings. We are talking about people, and we are exploring who we all are. As a supervisor, I am listening for these. I'm trying to elaborate, kind of open them up. So here are questions that a supervisee might be asking themselves or that a supervisor might ask. Who am I to this parent or this caregiver and this infant or young child? Am I seen as a guide, a friend, a comfort, frightening, a stranger? Who am I in the world to these people? What parts of myself are important to name and share? This goes back to what we were talking about diversity. If there are areas of difference that I think it might be important to share, and is a great topic for supervision. Listen, I went to the home and it turns out that this family presents this way and I present this way, and maybe I didn't know that, or I didn't expect that, or I'm not sure what to make of it. So really thinking about how is it that I might show up to this family? How are they showing up to me? And what would it be like to talk about that? And supervision is a great place to play that out. And as supervisees, again, can be our job to ask the little bit of hard and uncomfortable questions. And to be really confident in knowing that just because I ask, let's say, hey, Adrian, what do you think about actually saying that to the family? What do you think about saying, I wonder if it has meaning for you that I am obviously a lot younger than you and here to talk to you about being a parent, and you might have questions about that. we can kind of play out how that might go. And we might decide, and I have to have the confidence as a supervisor to know that Adrian and I might decide together that, you know what, I'm not going to do that next week. It's not that I don't think it's important. It's not that I don't honor it. Might do it in the future, but now's not the time. And that honoring something doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it or you have to speak it out loud, but we can play with it. We can try it. What do we think would happen if that happened? What would be good about doing that? What would be scary about doing that? What do I know about the people in front of me? And the flip side of that third bullet point is really important as well, right? What do I not know? What am I catching myself assuming? And I think supervision can be a really great place where it's when you feel comfortable with someone, right? It's very natural, and it can be a good sign in the supervisory relationship to feel comfortable to use words that are generalizations. So, if I'm the supervisee and I'm talking to my supervisor and I'm like, oh, she's always like really scattered. Well, what do I know about, what does that mean? What does that look like? How does that fit into their family picture, to their identity, to their self-conception of who they are? So there's what do I know? And the flip side, what do I not know? And maybe I'm assuming, and I'm using the word scattered, and well, what does tell me about the behaviors? And then how does it feel to sit with someone scattered? And maybe we get to a place where we go, oh, you know what? It's just like her energy is like really high and she has a lot of interests and she's kind of wanting to tackle a lot of things all at once. Oh, so it can be really positive, but is it maybe helpful for us to explore with a client what it would be like to slow things down? It's really an exploration and an honoring of, again, sort of what we know and what we don't know. And the last thing I want to say about this slide, but maybe one of the most important from an infant parent mental health perspective, if you look at this little visual, there's one person who's going to be really good at telling, well, who's going to be at least have the tools to tell us what they've done, what they think, and how they feel about it. They might be struggling, but they certainly have the cognitive and verbal abilities to do that. And one person on this slide who might not yet, probably doesn't. It is our job as clinicians and as supervisors, I truly believe in this work, to challenge ourselves continuously, to be making space for the sometimes unvoiced voice and thoughts and feelings of the little people, the children, the babies in the room. And that space doesn't have to be said out loud. And again, supervision is a great place for exploring what it might be to name a child who's missing, who's not in the room, who is wished for, or who is in the room, but whose needs aren't being fully responsively attended to, who's crying and not being heard. It might mean that we name it. It might mean that we hold that baby in mind ourselves. But one way or another, I want to hear about that baby. And I definitely push my supervisees. If I get through, if they come and they say, I want to talk about, I don't know, this dad's name is, Jake, and we talk about Jake and we talk about Jake and we get to the end of, okay, I think that's good. All right. And I haven't heard about the little guy, about the baby, I will ask. That is our responsibility as good infant mental health supervisors. It doesn't mean that I'm saying, why didn't you talk about him or where was he? It's not, but just some questions about, and do you think that, what was Jake, how did Jake's role as a dad play into this? I'm wondering if Jake was thinking about the impact of this on his, I'm going to go son, but we don't know that little guy, but like just making sure, and sometimes it's not even spoken as directly, but it's something that I'm keeping in mind as a supervisor. We are responsible for at least 2 people, if not more, in the families that we're supporting. And one of them is, able to read time and show up or not and answer the phone or not and talk to us. And the other one often is not. And so it's just an added responsibility there. When we're honoring people, we are honoring the people who cannot speak to us as clearly in the room. All right, we've got 3 more sort of ways of being as we think about how we might want to support really good reflective supervision. And these ones are phrased that, as I said, I sort of switched back and forth in these voices. These ones are phrased from the supervisor's point of view, but if you're a supervisee, you can ask yourself kind of what might I be doing in these? So I am asking myself as a supervisor, what is the story the provider is telling me? I'm not actually there. I don't have a video camera. What I have is a story, an interpretation, and that is necessarily filtered through the provider's lens. So what do I want to ask about? What do I want to wonder about? Sometimes I can say out loud, I'm curious if that's sort of the feeling you were getting in the room or something that you're kind of guessing at because of whatever, something that you've shared with me, something that worries you, something that the person's, methadone counselor said last week. Like, what's the story and what's getting pulled in and what might be getting left out? And that's not in a critical way. Sometimes the story is exactly what it needs to be and it has all the right ingredients, but it's just important to sort of ask ourselves, ask our supervisees, what is the story that's being told here? And how close or not is that to the story that the parent or caregiver might tell? And again, it's not that there's like a right or wrong, but what pieces are just a little easier to leave out? Or what pieces are getting stuck? If I come to supervision and I say that this parent was not able to hear her baby's cries, baby was in a high chair, baby was crying, and mom just only wanted to talk to me about her electricity bill, and it was really painful. Well, that's the story that I'm telling. And I'm telling a story about my pain and my pain in that moment. What might the parent or caregiver say? Were they also in pain? Were they in so much pain that they couldn't even hear? Or were they so scared of the pain they might feel if they heard their baby's cries that they went numb and didn't feel it? What's happening here? How do things kind of match up and link together? And how might they be misaligned? And again, that third one, when we are working with young children, what story might the child tell if they could? What are the words that the child might use? And we've talked in other webinars about the importance of verbalizing and vocalizing for the child as part of reflective practice, that we want to be able to really say what it might be that a child's experience might be, to ask about it, and to explore it, and sort of hold that as a chapter in this book that is being written here. So let's always be thinking about the stories. Okay, what comes up next? Again, this is the word we've used throughout, so it might be a little redundant, but how do we use reflection if a supervisee comes to me, or if I'm a supervisee and I'm bringing a story, right? It always has to begin with a story because I have to tell my supervisor what happened. There's no other way. But then how can I sort of get inside my own head a little bit? What's helping me think about this work? Am I noticing myself using some things that I learned a few weeks ago in a motivational interviewing training? Am I really compelled by the little one in front of me and maybe sometimes losing sight of the parent? What ideas, what perspectives are kind of helping me and pushing me forward? Maybe what's getting in the way? And what are my feelings? I will never forget, I was having a really frustrating time with the system, right? We talked about how systems belong in reflective supervision. And I went into my supervisor, and also a really painful thing had happened with the child and the parent. And the funny thing is now I don't even remember what that was. But I was like, and this happened and this happened. And I'm just so frustrated by this providers in this system. And I don't even know what to do. And my supervisor just looks at me and like deadpan goes, when do we burn it down? And I felt so seen and safe. Like, it is okay to say that, like, I'm having fantasies of like filing a complaint on these people, of like, no, making up some dirt and putting it in the Boston Globe. Like, I am so stuck in this system. And I just to be able to like have that feeling so immediately held and validated, I can tell you exactly what it was about. I'm not going to, but I could. Exactly where I was. It was really, really powerful for me and stayed with me. And I encourage all of you to find the reflective spaces where you can have that. I hope with your supervisees or your supervisors, if you're a supervisee, if that doesn't feel safe yet, sort of making sure that you have it in some other space, because it's better to get it somewhere than nowhere. And this last one I think is really great. How can I use my feelings to understand what might be happening in the work? So if I'm ending up feeling really, really frustrated with a client week after week, once I've kind of dug around and make sure that that's, not only linked to a cultural difference, that that's not only about my feelings because that day I was really frustrated anyway, that I've like explored it all and laid it out on the table with a supervisor, then that leaves space to go, well, wait a minute. If I've really done the work and I'm pretty sure that that is a sort of a true story, as true as stories can get, and this client is leaving me frustrated week after week, well, golly, they are probably leaving some other people frustrated week after week too. And now what do I want to do in the intervention in that work? What is happening between this client and me that I'm ended up frustrated week after week that might be getting in that client's way in terms of growth, right? End of the day, no, I don't have to say this, but we are there to serve and support our clients in their growth. And so if I've sort of done all of the exploring and I've talked about burning the place down and all the stuff about the feelings, and I'm like, yeah, but still, like, there's something happening week after week with this client. What can I learn from that that's actually going to help me help the client? And so as a supervisor, if you're taking notes week after week and it's stuck and it's frustrated and it's stuck and it's frustrated, like, that's something to talk about, not in a critical way, not like, why are you so stuck and so frustrated week after week? But oh my goodness, like, what can I uncover here? What tools of whatever intervention we're focused on can we use to sort of get underneath that? Because those feelings that are coming up, again, they might be about me. Got to sort those out. They might be about difference. I got to sort those out. But if I'm still feeling those feelings, those are useful. Those are useful. What do you think? What do you feel? What might that be about? That's the reflective stance that as supervisors, we want to lend to our supervisees, and that our supervisees then in turn can lend to our clients, because we know that's how humans grow, right? As a human myself, I don't grow when people just tell me how to solve my problems, just do this. We grow when we're really able to explore what's going on, what's underneath this, and that's the lens that we want to be able to offer to our supervisees. All right, let's look at our last sort of way of being here, which appropriately is sort of, okay, so you have this great supervision session and you reflect and you wonder and you paint a picture, you write a story, you lay it all out. And then where do I go from here? So again, sort of going back to, well, what do we know and what do we not know? And sometimes it's really an opportunity to think, well, the next time I see this client, this is what I want to ask about. I want to dig more into this. And I kind of laugh. I think in many of us who've been providers for a long time, we have our own little catchphrase that we use that's actually secret code for, well, I went to supervision. So I have definitely gone back to clients and gone like, I've been thinking about this a lot since the last time we saw you. And it's not that that's untrue. It is true, but I've been thinking about you a lot, and I talked to my supervisor about it. And I actually, it's interesting tension, right? I make light of it because I think, I want to bring back to my client in front of me the most important part, which is that I've been thinking and I want to support and help them. The part that I don't want to make light about is how we are transparent about supervision. And we've actually had some conversations recently in our team about sort of what it means to say to a client, like we talk about confidentiality, we talk about privacy, and that includes reflective supervision, right? We are not going to not talk about them in reflective supervision. So that's a little bit of a side conversation, but just especially for the supervisors, program administrators, program leads in the room to sort of think for yourselves about what your privacy and confidentiality statements do or don't say about supervision, and how you feel about that. There's not a legal requirement. It's very clear in like HIPAA and privacy practices that absolutely that's just a part of the clinical work. So I'm not saying that anyone's like violating any confidentiality. Please don't hear it that way. But just in terms of our transparency with our clients and how we do the work that we do, whether, hey, I'm going to run this by my supervisor. I talk week to week with my supervisor, whatever feels genuine to your practice. Anyway, as I said, that's a little bit of an aside, but something for administrators and leadership folks to sort of mark for yourselves. But it is true that oftentimes we go back to the client the following week with a little bit more of that directional arrow, with a little bit, some ideas about, well, what don't I know? Or did I assume something that I actually want to check out with the client? I left thinking this, but I guess I realized I don't actually know if that's true for you. I said this, but I actually don't know how it landed. So the knowing and not knowing is a way to sort of move forward. Again, how does what I think, right, as a provider, hopefully I have more tools than the client in front of me. I've been trained in some stuff, some motivational interviewing, some reflective practice, some child development. Like I've got some tools, and how do I offer those? What might I bring? But how's that going to feel? How's that going to feel for me and the client in front of me? What does it mean in terms of our next steps? And again, I think there's sometimes a little bit of a misunderstanding amongst some folks who haven't had or experienced reflective supervision, that it's like this mushy-gushy place where you just talk about your feelings and then go and then come back the next week and talk about your feelings. No, there's a directional arrow there. We are moving forward. We are not in service of our clients when we are not helping them to learn and grow. What does this mean? Sort of where do we go next? What's our next step? Is an important part of reflective supervision. So it's not just about, well, I talked about my feelings and then who cares, whatever after that. There is a moving forward, a collaborative next step that happens supervisor to supervisee and supervisee to client that we absolutely do not want to minimize. So I'm going to pause there, and we may or may not model, and I'm going to be transparent about what that's about. And then we're going to have some breakout rooms to reflect on where we have gotten to this morning. In terms of the modeling, I will tell you guys transparently, we sort of thought as a team about, we could have people practice this. Maybe I could have a supervisee who would do this with me, where I could actually have a little bit of supervision. But the thing I realized as I thought about that is that violates all those things that we said about being consistent and keeping our roles consistent and having relationship. So how I talk to a supervisee in week 1 is like 1%, I don't know, maybe more than that, 10% the same as how I talk to a supervisee in year 8. And I have some 8-year and 10-year supervisions. We talk differently. I'm consistent in who I am. I'm consistent in sort of, we meet and we do these things together week after week, but it is different. And so I thought the modeling for me, it didn't have quite the right feel to it, because I would be modeling you guys, one thing, something, but it wouldn't be the thing that you have or need in your supervision, or the thing that I would create if I was your supervisor. So I sort of paused on that. Now, here's what I will say. If anyone would like to experience, to show, to share, I am happy to take a few minutes. And as the supervisor, which, I am a supervisor, I would be role playing sort of whatever it might be like for you, some of those beginning things that we talked about, some of what we call contracting. It's not necessarily a formal contract, although it can be, around what the supervision would be like. So if someone would like to give that a try, then we can certainly do that together. If not, that is totally okay. So I'm going to pause. Let's see. Oh, I can see the chat. I can see the chat, or you can raise a hand if you want to give it a try, if you want to just play with it a little bit, if you're feeling like chatty this morning. But again, if not, I really want to respect that we've talked about how supervision should be, and it wouldn't be, kind of a cold call in the middle of a Zoom. So I want to honor both sides of that. All right, that completely tracks. I will say, again, sort of the things that I would have wanted to focus on, because this is where the beginning of a good reflective relationship starts, is about how we should be together. Does this time work? Does this space work? And it's not to say you can't change those things, right? I've moved offices, I've changed times. Hey, now I'm going to be teaching on Thursdays. I need a different time, but it's just that it's spoken and that it's honored as a change when it does change. What do you want to bring to a reflective supervision space? It's really important to ask people if they've received reflective supervision before. What has that been like? What's worked? What hasn't felt so good? When you hear reflective supervision and I talking about our feelings, what feels scary? Are you worried that I'm going to become your therapist? And that's another really common sort of struggling place is, okay, well, reflective supervision is all mushy gushy and you don't move forward. Nope, absolutely not. Oh, well, reflective supervision, it's just like you're the therapist. You're just going to be asking me all about my feelings. No, because I'm only about asking about your feelings in the context of the clients you're working with and the work you're doing. It is not necessarily my place to say, oh, and I don't know, how'd you feel about that, all staff meeting that we had this morning? I might check in about it, but it's not that I'm here to unearth all your feelings about everything. And the other thing I want to say, just in terms of sort of what happens at the beginning of a supervisory relationship, is that we do talk about sort of what feelings are and aren't and will or won't be over time welcome in this space. And I usually say something like, this is a space where the use of ourself, who we are and what we bring to the space is really important. And I will ask you about that. And I will try to say things like, if you're comfortable sharing, or would you want to talk a little more about something that's come up? So, I might have someone in supervision and they're telling me a story that's difficult, but it's not like super painful. And I'm noticing that they are having tears, right? I'm noticing the tears. Would you like to tell me more about what's coming up for you? but there is space there also that because I am not the therapist, I am not always going to sort of push hard into that. It is important to respect that, if I notice it creating maybe difficulties in the work, that if the client is having tears, or excuse me, if the clinician or provider is having tears every time they talk about the same client, then I definitely, probably need to bring that into the work, right? But every minutia of what the person in front of me is experiencing, I am not their therapist. And there needs to be space and permission to take time with that, to say, we can come back to that next week if you want. I'm noticing it. I'm aware of it. I'm going to hold it. And when you're ready, we'll go there. Like that's a part of being a respectful supervisor, as opposed to someone therapist who might, every therapist have a different style, but might push a little harder. So those are some of the beginning experience things. And again, that we're talking about that. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into breakout rooms for just about 8 minutes. I'm going to give you, about 4 minutes, and then we'll broadcast you can broadcast messages to breakout rooms. We'll broadcast you a message so that you know. But in the first 4 minutes, just to do some reflecting, if you want to turn your camera off, if it's not already, to really think about these questions. Look at them. They all start with who. They might be different who, and that's okay. Who helps you feel listened to and understood? Can you think of a time, ideally in your work, where you've had an aha moment? Who helped you get there? It might have been a supervisor, but it might not. Who has helped you work through something that made you furious? And I intentionally use that word furious. That's a big, strong word, right? But if you haven't felt furious in this work, I think maybe you haven't been here long. It can be some hard work. So I would love for people to be able to take a few minutes to reflect. Again, if your camera is off, if you would like to write. And then we're going to take a few minutes for you all to talk together. And here's my ask of you, though. This is the ask that's sort of the collaborative part. Listen for themes. What is it that helps us feel listened to and understood? What is it that helps us get to an aha moment? What is it that helps us move past rage or fury or devastation into productive work? So first part, self-reflection. Second part, let's see if we can work together in groups of sort of 4 or so to really figure out some themes. And then we'll come back and we'll just have a couple of minutes to share out. So I'm going to pass the mic and the controls back over to my wonderful, magical colleagues who are going to be able to create our rooms. Hold back in. Okay. Oh, I love seeing all the little windows. Great. So we just have a few minutes left together, and we're going to do just a little sort of housekeeping and wrapping up at the end. But hopefully people had some time to do a little self-reflection and then some time to connect with each other about what works, what brings out the best in you, in your thinking and your creativity, and your making space for feelings. I would love to hear if 1 or 2 people would like to share out. Just a reminder, we don't share out like, oh, well, Erica said blah, blah, blah. But in my group we talked about, or you can certainly use an I statement, anything that people want to share for our own continued learning.
I think what we talked about in our breakout was I noticed the common theme is like the level of support and kind of feeling like the door is always open, whether it's, reflective supervision with our supervisor or clinicians, like other FRSSs. It's just that it's there. And it's very, very helpful. So
I love that. I mean, it really is touching on a theme of consistency and sort of that it's there when you need it. And also that, I mean, it sounds to me like a lot of really strong relationships that I could go to this person or this person or this person, and that in modeling how our relationships should be, it means that I could turn to a colleague if I needed to. And I really appreciate that, Chelsea. Thank you. Any other sort of key themes or key takeaways? Well, Erica's going to wrap up with sort of key takeaways from, what we hope are some of the key takeaways. Erica or Adrian, I'm actually not sure, with our takeaway slides. But again, genuinely hope that this gave you an opportunity to think about what you need in your work. If you are a supervisee and are hoping that you could maybe bring some things to supervision, how would it feel to say something like, hey, I'm wondering if in our supervisory space we could do X or Y. I would really benefit from Z, and is that something that we could try out? So if you're feeling brave, if you're feeling empowered, if you need a place to role play that, your TA team is here for you. And we're here to just happy to brainstorm that together.
Thank you, Amy. So I think, that's next. We can go to the next slide, please. Brings us to our key takeaways, which you can see in the guide. I'm just going to move us along and we're going to keep going so we can wrap up on time. Our next webinar, I am so excited that starting next month, we are going to be diving into actually serving families with chapter 2.1, which is engagement. And it really is the process of engagement often requires a significant investment of time to build trusting relationships. And we're going to dive into how we have a little bit of a longer initial engagement period and what we do during that time to build trusting relationships with the families that we serve. We have an opportunity for ongoing support. You can get more information at our website, which is www.firststepstogetherma.org. Every Friday, we hold office hours from 9 to 10 for questions regarding the My Family portfolio or doing the work. And you can connect with us by emailing me or anyone else on the training and TA team, and my email address is here. We are going to put a survey in the chat. We would appreciate if you could please complete that survey. And I just want to open the door. I think we can move on slides. Open the door for any questions or comments that you may have before we close out. But we appreciate having you all here. It would be great if you could fill out the survey. I want to thank Amy Summer so much for your wonderful sharing on reflective supervision. It was great to hear from you today.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, everyone. Great to see familiar faces, new faces. Really hope we're building things that will be useful to you in this work.
Oh, and yes, as Nahia said, the survey is anonymous, so please feel free to answer it honestly. We appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for attending. Have a great rest of your day.